Okay, column 9, the 5 basic chord shapes. We just talked a little bit about how chords are constructed. That can be a little bit deep, but this part shouldn't be too hard for you. There are 5 basic chord shapes from which all other chords come from. I did a book for Hal Leonard a few years back that was called the Picture Chord Encyclopedia. It has 2,640 photographs of my left hand playing every imaginable kind of crazy jazz weirdo chord you can come up with. But you know what? All of those chords and the tens of thousands of other chords you could build on the guitar can all be traced back to one of these 5 shapes. And there's an easy way to remember it. Maybe you've heard of the caged system. C-A-G-E-D, caged. Those are your 5 chord shapes. You know how to play a C chord, I'm sure. I'm sure you know how to play an A chord, a G chord, an E chord, and a D chord. Those are your 5 basic chord shapes. They are useful to you in more ways than you might think. Whenever you're trying to learn a song and there's some weird chord that's in that song, maybe you've got a songbook in front of you, and you know most of the chords in the song already, but then all of a sudden there's that one chord that you've never seen before, you've never tried to play, and maybe it's hard to play too, maybe the fingering's really kind of difficult. If you really examine it and you can trace it back to one of these 5 shapes, it will become easier for you to remember how to play it. Okay? Not only will it become easier to remember how to play it, it may actually just become easier to play just because all of a sudden it makes more sense to you and you just can say something like, oh, it's just part of a C chord with that one extra finger. You know, so you get to understand these concepts and it helps to build. All right? So let's look at this. Let's look at the caged system this way. I can take all 5 of those shapes and I can play a chord with each shape. I'm going to use, again, the key of C. I'm going to start with a C chord. I'm going to start with a C shape C chord. Here it is, right? That's a C shape. There's my C-shaped C chord. Now you very well may know the next one up the neck. That C bar chord at the 3rd fret. Well, what shape is that chord really? That shape is really, if we played it the proper way, it's an A-shaped chord. If I take that C bar chord at the 3rd fret and I slide it down, what do I end up with? Down at the open strings I got my A chord, right? It's an A-shaped chord. When we play it at the 3rd fret, it's the chord C, because it's got the notes for a C chord, C, E, and G, but it's that A shape. So that is something for you to remember. Now most of us play that chord that way with that 3rd finger, okay? What's the next chord up the neck? Remember C-A-G-E-D, caged. Now most people don't ever play this kind of chord here, but if we take a G chord, and I'm going to play it with these fingers, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th fingers. This note right here is G. It's our root note for this chord shape. I could slide that chord up. People do this often by putting a capo on their guitar. You can do it with a bar. You can do it with your 1st finger as a bar if you work at it a bit. If I take this chord and I slide that G note all the way up to the 8th fret, to C, I keep that G shape and I put a bar behind it. Remember, the G chord was 2 frets away from the open string, so my bar has to be 2 frets away from my chord. This is a G-shaped C chord. Okay? Now I'll admit it, there's not much use for this chord, at least not with this fingering. But there is a lot of use for a very similar fingering. It's much easier to play. Of course it takes some getting used to, but it's much easier than this. I'm struggling to hang on to this chord. I don't ever play this. But this is what I do. I keep the bar in the same place, and I put my pinky on the root note, and there's my C chord. I'm deadening the note that that other finger would have been on. My pinky's leaning on it, and there it is. There is a C chord that I use all the time, and all kinds of classic rock songs use this chord, and sometimes they do this really cool little thing where they play that chord, then they take the second and third fingers and put them down over here, and then back. You've heard the Rolling Stones do this over and over and over again, and a whole lot of other people. Okay? This is a shape that you should get to be able to play.